what I wanted to do was just bring a little bit the Bauhaus into the context of the early 20th century. Often we tend to think of the Bauhaus as a standalone, one and only, but you know, there was the arts and crafts movement in Great Britain, and you all know Charles René Mackintosh. So this was one of the idea systems that was influencing people. And keep in mind, in the early 20th century, you had Gaudi doing his work in Barcelona, and you had Wagner in Vienna. So there were a lot of thinkers at this period which were doing modernist kind of buildings. And this is the Bauhaus at the Wiemeyer, where Vanderbilt was there. Now, even this building, though it was designed under the aristocratic period of the pre-democratic period of Germany, it's a very modernistic, lovely building at Wiemeyer, where the Bauhaus started, and later it moved to Dessau. Now, why did I show this? Because this is a building by a person called Peter Behrens, and I hope the architects here know some of the names of people who worked for Peter Behrens: Walter Gropius, Le Corbusier, Mies van der Rohe, and they all worked in the first and second decade of the 20th century. So to me, Peter Behrens in this building, which is 1909, is really sort of a beginning point for thinking which led to the Bauhaus. If you look at it, you can see where Gropius picked up a lot of his ideas, and Gropius worked on the working drawings of this building when he was in Peter Behrens' place. Now, there was the Weymouth edition of the Frank Lloyd Wright drawings, published in Germany around 1910, 1911. And this was an eye-opener for people in Germany, because you had like the Unity Temple and some of the Kuhnli House and other large open plans of Frank Lloyd, very free kind of planning. This influenced Gropius and other people very dramatically. And I think it's important to realize that all of these things were going on. This is Gropius's famous, I think it's his most famous building. It's the factory, which he and Adolf Meyer did. It's definitely a takeoff on the Peter Behrens building, but it's also a precursor to the Bauhaus building. And I think in its time, it was probably the most modern factory in the world. A very important building, something that we all refer to. So this is, again, before the Bauhaus. Now, Fresnay, this is the Orly hangars now. So that makes us think, what was happening in this time in history? You know, in the early 20th century, we didn't have airplanes. It was an experiment. And by the time the First World War was over, the whole technology of airplanes had developed so much that you started having commercial aircraft, and you had a hangar like this, which is a shell structure by Fresnay. So this kind of thing was going on, and Gropius was aware of all this. He was aware of the structural design. He was aware of different things taking place. Frank Lloyd Wright did this house in California with an open plan, very strict kind of geometry. And then you all know the Erich Mendelssohn's Einstein Tower. So this kind of very romantic, you could say, expressionist kind of work was going on. And there was the Werkbund movement. Werkbund movement was again around 1909, up until the war. They believed that the crafts and art should come together. And there were huge arguments. I think in 1914 there was a major debate, and it sort of fell apart just before the war. Vanderbilt was proposing that creativity and art was more important than industry. And others, the founder of the Werkbund movement, was saying no, that actually art is out, industrial design is in, that if you design a house, you should be able to have 3 types of doors, 4 types of windows and panels and put it together. So there was this argument between industrial design, modulation, and artistic design. Gropius supported Vanderbilt's argument for more creativity. And that argument continued into the Bauhaus later. Now, very few people don't know about Schindler's work in the United States. If you look at this house, it's his own house in California, a very modern piece of architecture, in a way predating architecture in the Bauhaus. This is Mendelssohn's factory, some other work. I think all the architects here would know this building. It's in Paris, and it's a lot of ferroconcrete, stained glass, things like that are coming to this building, Perret's building. Look at how beautiful it is. Now, here structure analysis is used to create more space for glass, more space for openness, and it's an incredible piece of architecture. So when the Bauhaus was starting, you had people like Corbusier doing some of his early work. Ozenfant, of course, is a famous artist he designed for, and Joseph Hoffman, and Eric Mendelssohn, this lovely department store in Berlin, Stuttgart, I'm saying. So just quickly, I wanted to show you these things. This Schindler beach house for Lovell, you will all know this other building, Adolf, this building for Lovell. Lovell had the beach house, but he also did this famous Richard Neutra house in the 20s. This is the same time the Bauhaus is working. Now keep in mind, the Bauhaus didn't actually teach architecture. The Bauhaus was teaching crafts, and it had pottery, and it had weaving, and it had all kinds of fields like that. And it was teaching basic design. In the beginning, they were teaching in the almost medieval craft system where you had a course for journeyman, and then you could become a master. And I think they had, the most important thing was, Ravi pointed out, was their basic design course. They decided to have a diploma right about the time that Gropius left in 1928. And they ended the basic course, the Albers, and the other course in 1930 when Mies van der Rohe took over. And that kind of ended the homogenization of students. All the students were taking that first basic course together. But I just wanted to show you these buildings to give you an idea of the context, the kind of things Alvar Aalto was doing at the same time as the Bauhaus. Very exciting period in terms of work. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but then Saarinen started the Cranbrook Academy at the same time roughly as the Bauhaus in America. And his son, of course, is a very famous architect that everybody knows. And Mies, who became in 1930 the director of the Bauhaus, did this lovely pavilion in Barcelona. Everybody knows the Barcelona pavilion. So Gropius, who incidentally was I knew and met, even I went to his last birthday before he passed away, didn't really want to be a great designer, in my opinion. In fact, people say when Mies van der Rohe and Gropius came to America, Mies said, "I will not touch the topic of the Bauhaus," and Gropius said, "I will not touch becoming a master architect." They more or less divided the spheres of activity. Of course, Mies did do the IIT in Chicago, and he did teach there for some time. But Gropius sort of took over the Graduate School of Design at Harvard, brought in people like Jose Luis Sert and other famous architects to build up a really strong architectural course. Now, it's also important to note that the Bauhaus never taught much on urbanization. While in the 20s, you had people doing things like Radiant City. Le Corbusier was working on all kinds of ideas. Even Frank Lloyd Wright was doing Broadacre City. And so many ideas about urbanization and industrialization and how people coming into the city would work. But somehow in the Bauhaus, they did study nature, but they didn't study environmental impact, urbanization, things of that nature. It was more an issue of how do you integrate art and crafts. Now, keep in mind, Gropius was very, very excited about this thing because he said art is something being done by dilettantes, by wealthy people, for wealthy people. It has nothing to do with the average man. And so there was this argument about the artist doing the high art sculptures and statues, etc., and the craftspeople. And Gropius was very strong about trying to integrate these things. And there are a lot of arguments. Some of the people that Ravi showed, they quit the Bauhaus in these arguments between art and crafts. So these were all shown by Ravi, so I don't want to go into it much more. Famous things designed at the Bauhaus. Lovely now. Absolutely beautiful. So thank you. I just wanted to introduce what was happening in the early 20th century, out of which the Bauhaus, in my opinion, grew out of these things. The Bauhaus didn't just drop out of heaven, okay?